Rosemary Lowell screamed when her foot slipped. One moment the ground was solid beneath her boots. The next, it was gone, crumbling into dust and stone that rattled down into nothing. She caught herself on instinct, fingers scraping against the rock until her palms burned and her breath tore loose from her chest. Pain flared sharp and immediate in her ankle. She hung there, pressed against the cliff face, every muscle shaking as the wind pulled at her skirts like impatient hands. This was how it ended. Then, her thoughts went home, to her mother, Dorothy, lying pale and still beneath a thin quilt, lungs fighting for each breath, to the smell of dried herbs and dust inside the farmhouse, and unbidden, to Charles Dunham, his steady voice, his careful distance, close enough to protect her, to feel the gravity of her presence, yet anchored just beyond the threshold where hearts intertwine. She wondered, absurdly, if he would come looking for her. Her fingers slipped another inch. Then a shadow crossed the rock above. A hand appeared scarred, steady, unmistakably real.
"Give me your hand."
A low voice said. Her breath trembled. Rosemary, with nothing left to give the world, reached up. Before we go on, if you've ever found yourself standing on the edge of a choice, unsure whether to hold on or let go, this story is for you. Every like, every comment, and every subscription truly means a great deal to our channel. Thank you for spending your time here and listening to this story. Stay with us. Rosemary's journey has only just begun. New Mexico territory. 1877 was a place caught between endings and beginnings that never quite arrived. The Apache Wars had officially been declared over, but peace in the territory was a thin, unreliable thing. Soldiers still rode the roads, settlers still slept with rifles within reach. The land itself bore the marks of exhaustion. Months of drought had turned grass to brittle wire and left the soil cracked like old skin. Supply wagons came late, if they came at all. Medicine was scarce, trust even scarcer. Rosemary Lowell had grown up inside that uncertainty, shaped by it as surely as the wind shaped the canyons. The Lowell Ranch sat several miles outside town, a stubborn patch of fenced land that refused to disappear despite the odds. It had never been wealthy, but it had endured. Rosemary learned early that endurance was not loud. It was waking before dawn, hauling water, mending what could be mended, and learning which silences mattered. Her mother, Dorothy Lowell, had taught her that much before illness stole the strength from her lungs. Dorothy had once been formidable, sharp-eyed, capable, respected, but now she spent her days confined to a narrow bed, each breath a measured effort. Rosemary became many things because of that. Caretaker, provider, the one who stayed. Charles Dunham had arrived at the ranch when they were both still children. His family, strained by debt and violence closer to town, had sent him to live with the Lowells for safety and work. He was quiet then, watchful, already carrying a seriousness that did not belong to a boy his age. Rosemary remembered the first night he slept in the small loft above the barn, pretending not to be afraid, pretending he wasn't listening to every sound outside. They grew up side by side, not as siblings, but not as strangers either. They worked the same fields, rode the same fence lines, shared meals without ceremony. Charles was always there when something broke, when an animal went missing, when strangers passed too close to the property. He learned early how to stand between Rosemary and danger, even when no one asked him to. As they grew older, that instinct hardened into habit. By the time Charles left to join the law, Rosemary already knew she would miss him in ways she did not yet have language for. He returned years later wearing a badge, his posture straighter, his voice steadier, carrying the authority of a man tasked with keeping order in a place that resisted it. Sheriff Dunham. People called him now. A necessary man. A reliable one. To Rosemary, he was still Charles, the boy who had learned her rhythms before he learned the town's. And that was where the trouble began. There were things Rosemary Lowell never questioned, only accepted. The seasons would turn, the land would demand more than it gave, and Charles Dunham would always return to the ranch standing just far enough away after he became sheriff. His visits followed a careful pattern. He arrived in the late afternoon, his horse lathered, his hat tipped in greeting. He asked about the fences, the wells, the condition of the road leading into town. He listened closely when Rosemary spoke of her mother's health, his brow tightening with concern, his jaw setting in that familiar way that meant he was already thinking of solutions. But never of her. When Rosemary was younger, she mistook his restraint for patience. She told herself he was waiting for the right moment, the right stability, the right future. She learned, slowly and painfully, that some men waited not because they meant to act, but because they feared what action would require. Once, after a long day repairing storm damage, they sat on the porch as dusk settled over the fields. Rosemary watched the way the fading light softened his face and felt something in her finally reach its limit.
Charles, do you ever think that staying safe might cost more than leaving?
Her voice barely carrying over the cicadas. He looked at her deeply as if he could feel the threshold they were standing on. But when Charles spoke, it was the sheriff who answered.
Someone has to stay. This land doesn't survive without people who hold the line,
he said. She nodded, because she always did. And that was the moment something inside her began to loosen, not with anger, but with understanding. Charles loved the land, the duty, the idea of protection. She waited for him to change the shape of their closeness, to name it, to step across the invisible line they had drawn together without discussion. She waited through seasons and small conversations, through his visits to the ranch, where he asked about the fences, the livestock, her mother's health always careful, always respectful, never once asking about her heart. Each time he left, she told herself it would be different next time, eventually. She stopped telling herself that. Rosemary did not grow bitter. She simply folded that waiting inward, the way women on the frontier folded so many things inward, until it became part of how she carried herself. Charles's presence became something familiar and incomplete, like a song that never reached its final note. He protected her. Yes, he cared. But care, she learned, was not the same as choosing. He loved her too, in his own careful way. But love that never risked itself remained unchanged, year after year. That was why. When Dorothy's illness worsened and the town doctor spoke of a plant called OSHA, a root used by Apache healers, said to clear the lungs when nothing else could, Rosemary did not ride to town to find Charles. She thought of him. She always did. But the thought ended the same way it always had, with her standing still, waiting for a door that never opened. Instead, she saddled her horse and rode north alone, into terrain that grew steeper and less forgiving with every mile. The land cared nothing for her reasons. It did not welcome nor reject. It simply tested those who crossed it and marked the ones who survived. Pressing against the cliff while the wind dragged at her skirts and the sky deepened into storm, Rosemary felt the truth settle quietly inside her. If she lived, it would not be because someone had reached for her at last. It would be because she refused to let go. The doctor did not speak gently when he finally told Rosemary the truth. There was no point in it. Dorothy Lowell's lungs were failing, slowly but steadily, as if the dust of the land had decided to claim her piece by piece. The tinctures he carried were nearly gone. The supply wagons from Santa Fe were weeks behind schedule, if they came at all. He named the illness, then shrugged in the practiced way of men who had learned to measure hope sparingly. "There is one thing," he said at last, lowering his voice. "A root. Osha. I learned of it from Apache healers years ago. It grows high in the rocky country north of here." Rosemary felt the words settle into her bones before she answered. She had heard the name before, in passing, spoken with a mix of respect and disbelief. Osha was not something a person simply went out and found. It grew where the land was steep and unforgiving, where paths narrowed into guesses, and one wrong step could mean the end. "How soon?" she asked. The doctor met her eyes.
If you mean for it to matter, now.
That night, Rosemary sat at her mother's bedside, listening to the rasp of Dorothy's breathing, watching the rise and fall of her chest like a fragile promise. She thought of Charles, of the way he would listen, frown, and immediately begin planning who to ask, what to secure, how to do it safely. She knew he would go if she asked. She knew that, and she knew she would owe him something she could never return. The thought tightened her chest, not with fear, but with an old, familiar ache. She had spent too many years waiting, hoping, reading meaning into silences that never resolved. Asking him now would bind her back into that place grateful, careful, still. So she did not ask. Before dawn, Rosemary saddled her horse and rode out alone. The sky still bruised purple with night. The land changed quickly as she traveled north. The ground rose, the soil thinned, and rock began to assert itself in sharp angles and narrow ledges. Wind cut colder there, carrying the scent of stone and dry pine. She dismounted where the trail vanished entirely, leading her horse on foot as the terrain grew steeper. Each step required attention. Each breath burned. Still, she pressed on, driven by the image of her mother's face and the knowledge that turning back would mean surrender. It was near midday when the ground betrayed her. One moment her boot was secure. The next, it slid on loose gravel, her weight pitching forward as the world dropped away beneath her. She grabbed for purchase, fingers scraping against stone, pain flaring as her ankle twisted violently beneath her. She did not remember screaming, only the shock of hanging there, suspended between sky and emptiness. Muscles screaming in protest as the wind tore at her skirts. Her strength faded faster than she expected. That was when the shadow crossed the rock above her. A man stood there, steady against the wind, as if the cliff itself had shaped him. He moved without urgency, lowering himself with controlled precision until he reached her. His hand closed around her forearm, strong and certain, anchoring her back to the rock. "Hold," he said. His voice was low, accented, carrying no panic. She obeyed. He pulled her to a narrow ledge where she collapsed, breath shuddering, pain pulsing hot and sharp through her ankle. Only then did she look at him properly. Buckskin clothing worn soft with use, dark hair bound back, eyes that assessed her injuries quickly, without judgment.
You should not travel here alone.
He said. already kneeling to examine her ankle. "I didn't have a choice," she replied through clenched teeth. He paused, then nodded once, as if accepting that answer as sufficient. He bound her ankle with practiced hands, firm but careful, using strips torn from his own clothing. When he finished, he sat back on his heels, watching her as if weighing a decision. "What do you seek?" he asked. "OSHA," Rosemary said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "For my mother." At that, something shifted in his expression, not surprise, but recognition. He stood and gestured toward the higher ground beyond the ledge. "I know where it grows. If you can walk, I will guide you," he said. She studied him, this stranger who had appeared out of the land itself, and realized something else with quiet clarity. He was offering help without conditions, without expectation. "Yes," she said, "I can walk." And with that, Rosemary Lowell followed Chino deeper into the high country, unaware that the choice she had just made would change far more than the course of her journey. They moved slowly at first, the pace set not by the land but by Rosemary's injury. Chino did not rush her. He adjusted his stride to match hers, stepping ahead only when the terrain demanded it, then turning back to offer a steadying hand without comment. The path he followed was barely a path at all, more a series of decisions made in silence. Reading the slope of the rock, the way water had once cut through stone, the places where plants clung stubbornly to life. Rosemary became acutely aware of the difference between this kind of guidance and the protection she had always known. Charles guarded from a distance, scanning the horizon, anticipating threats before they arrived. Chino moved beside her, attentive to the ground beneath her feet, the immediate reality of each step. One kind of care watched the world, the other stayed present within it by mid-afternoon. The air thinned and cooled. Clouds gathered low and heavy against the peaks, threatening a sudden storm. Chino led her into a shallow overhang where they could rest. He knelt and built a small fire with movements so efficient they barely registered as effort. Rosemary watched him work, noticing how he conserved energy, how nothing he did was wasted. "You know this land," she said at last. He glanced at her, a faint curve touching the corner of his mouth. "The land knows me," he replied. "I listen." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her. She had spent her life learning how to endure, how to keep going despite the land. He spoke as if survival came from cooperation rather than resistance. When they resumed, the terrain grew steeper. Rosemary felt the strain in her injured ankle, the sharp reminders that she was pushing a body already taxed by worry and sleepless nights. More than once, she nearly suggested turning back. Each time, she pictured Dorothy's face and pressed on. They found the OSHA just before dusk. It grew where the rock broke open into a narrow shelf, its dark green leaves standing out against the pale stone. Chino knelt and touched the plant with something like reverence, murmuring words she did not understand. He showed Rosemary how to harvest the root carefully, leaving enough behind for it to grow again. "You take only what is needed," he said. "Anything more weakens the ground." She nodded, committing the lesson to memory. As they worked, a quiet settled between them, not the heavy silence Rosemary had grown used to, filled with unspoken questions, but something gentler, a shared focus. When the roots were secured and wrapped, Chino rose and looked toward the darkening sky. "We should return before night closes the ridges," he said. The journey back was harder. The wind picked up, sharp and cold, and Rosemary's ankle throbbed with renewed insistence. She stumbled once, then again. Without a word, Chino stopped and crouched in front of her. "Lean on me," he said. She hesitated, the old instinct to refuse help rising automatically. Then she remembered how many times she had borne everything alone simply because she had never been asked not to. She placed her weight against him. They moved like that for the last stretch, her arm over his shoulder, his steps careful and uncomplaining. When they reached the lower slopes, the storm broke in earnest, rain slashing sideways across the land. They took shelter beneath another rocky overhang, closer now to the route back toward the plains. As Chino fed the fire, Rosemary felt the tension she had carried for days finally begin to loosen. Exhaustion settled in, deep and heavy. She realized she trusted him not because she knew him well, but because he had never once made her feel like a burden. "You could have left after you helped me," she said quietly, watching the flames. "You didn't have to stay." He met her gaze steadily. "I chose to." The words were not dramatic yet. They struck with the strength of truth. His voice softened.
I won't follow you into your world unless you want me there.
He said gently, "And I won't ask unless you know you are free to refuse." Rosemary swallowed. No one had ever framed choice so plainly for her. With Charles, there had always been implication, history, obligation, layers of meaning she had been expected to navigate alone. Here, there was none of that. She felt something shift inside her, a door opening that she had long believed was sealed. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. "My life has been narrow." Chino considered this. "Narrow paths can still lead somewhere," he said, "but only if you walk them because you want to, not because you are afraid to stop." The rain eased. When they finally set out again, Rosemary felt lighter despite the pain, as if naming her fear had reduced its hold. By the time they reached the edge of the plains, dawn was just beginning to thin the darkness. In the distance, the outline of the Lowell ranch emerged, small and stubborn against the vastness. Chino stopped. "I will not go farther," he said. "This is where your path becomes your own." She looked at him, at the man who had entered her life without warning and altered its shape without force. For a moment, she was tempted to ask him to come closer, to stay, to define something that had not yet fully formed. But she understood now that some things needed space to breathe. "Thank you," she said, meaning far more than the words could carry. He inclined his head once, accepting the gratitude without claiming it. As Rosemary limped toward home, clutching the wrapped roots against her chest, she knew the journey had already changed her. She had not been rescued from her life. She had stepped into it differently. And somewhere behind her, Chino watched until she was safely inside the fences, then turned back toward the mountains, leaving no promise, only the echo of a choice she would not soon forget. The OSHA worked more quickly than Rosemary had dared to hope. Within days, Dorothy Lowell's breathing eased, the tight rasp loosening into something closer to rest. Color returned to her cheeks in small, cautious increments, like a land learning to trust rain again. The doctor did not call it a miracle. He called it fortunate timing and careful preparation. Rosemary knew better. Some things arrived only because someone was willing to walk into danger to bring them back. Chino did not stay in the house. He built a temporary shelter in the tree line beyond the pasture, far enough that he would not unsettle the hands who worked the ranch, close enough that he could watch the house when night fell. Each morning, Rosemary found the evidence of his presence without ever seeing him, fresh meat laid neatly near the gate, kindling stacked where it would stay dry. A subtle repair made to a sagging section of fence. He never crossed the threshold unless invited. From the edge of the trees, Chino watched Rosemary move through her days with a quiet intensity that surprised even him. He had known, the first time he pulled her from the cliff, that she was strong. But this was different. This was strength without spectacle. She spoke gently to her mother, patiently to the ranch hands, firmly when decisions needed to be made. She did not command. She did not retreat. She endured with purpose. And that was what unsettled him most. He had lived most of his life assuming he would walk alone. The wars had taught him that survival required distance, that attachments were liabilities the world was eager to exploit. He had seen too many promises broken by violence, too many lives narrowed by the demands of others. When he chose the mountains, he had believed he was choosing freedom. He had not expected to find her. At night, as the ranch fell quiet, Chino sat by a low fire and confronted thoughts he had trained himself not to entertain. He thought of the way Rosemary listened when he spoke, not as if weighing his words against her own needs, but as if they mattered simply because they were his. He thought of how she did not flinch from his past when he spoke of it in fragments of the reservation he refused. The counting of names, the taking of rifles, the slow erosion of choice. "I left," he said once, speaking into the darkness, though no one stood before him, "because staying would have made me smaller." The land did not answer, but the words steadied him. When Rosemary finally came to the edge of the trees one evening, the sky burning orange behind her, he did not pretend surprise. She sat on a fallen log across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You don't have to stay out here," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but I choose to." She studied him, her gaze searching but not demanding. "Why?" Chino exhaled slowly. This was the moment he had been preparing for, though he had not known it until now. "Because I will not enter your life as a shadow," he said, "and I will not take a place that has not been offered freely." He looked at her then, fully, letting her see what he usually kept guarded. "I have lived where men took what they wanted and called it law. I will not be that man, not with you." Rosemary's breath caught, but she did not look away. "I want you," he continued, his voice steady but unguarded. "Not because you need me, not because I saved you. I want you because you stand on your own ground, and you still make room beside you." Silence followed, not the brittle silence of uncertainty, but one thick with meaning. Rosemary felt the weight of his words settle into her chest, heavy and undeniable. This was not a confession wrapped in hope. It was an offering that expected nothing in return. "I don't know what I can promise," she said at last. "I am not asking for promises," Chino replied. "Only truth." That night, Rosemary returned to the house with his words echoing inside her. She sat beside her mother's bed and held Dorothy's hand, feeling the steady warmth there now. For the first time in weeks, fear loosened its grip, as Dorothy's strength returned enough for her to sit upright. Rosemary finally spoke the question she had been carrying. "Mother," she said, keeping her voice steady, "how do you know when to choose what you want instead of what feels expected?" Dorothy studied her daughter with eyes that had seen drought, loss, and years of unspoken compromise. "You feel smaller," she said simply, "when you are living someone else's life." Rosemary swallowed. And if two paths are open,
Then choose the one where your voice does not disappear.
Dorothy replied, love should not require you to become quieter. The words settled deep. Rosemary realized how long she had measured herself by what she did not ask for, what she did not need, what she did not say. She thought of Charles in the comfort of familiarity. She thought of Chino and the unfamiliar weight of being seen clearly. Outside, Chino fed the fire and stared into the embers, confronting a realization that frightened him more than any pursuit ever had. He was no longer content with survival alone, and whatever choice Rosemary made, he would honor it even if honoring it meant walking away. Charles Dunham arrived at the Lowell Ranch near sundown, the light already thinning into long bands of copper and dust. He dismounted without hurry, the way a man did when he knew a place well enough to expect it unchanged. His horse stamped once, sensing tension before its rider did. Rosemary heard him before she saw him. The sound was familiar leather creaking, boots on dry earth. For a brief, traitorous moment, something in her loosened with recognition. Then she stepped out from the side of the house and saw who stood with her at the fence line. Chino. He had come earlier than usual, standing just inside the shadow of the cottonwoods, a bundle of meat slung over one shoulder. He had not crossed the boundary of the yard. He never did. Charles stopped short. The air shifted, tightening like a drawn wire. His hand moved on instinct, not anger first, but training. The revolver cleared leather in a smooth, practiced motion, the barrel lifting and settling in a straight, unyielding line toward them. Step away from her, Charles said, his voice flat, carrying the weight of law more than fear. Chino did not reach for a weapon. He did not even turn fully toward Charles. Instead, he stepped half a pace forward, placing himself between Rosemary and the gun, his shoulders squared, his hands open and visible. That was when Rosemary recognized the sound beneath the words. Charles, she said sharply. Her voice cut through the space like a blade. She moved without thinking, stepping out from behind Chino and straight into the line of fire. The muzzle of the gun was suddenly inches from her chest. Put it down, she said. If you mean to shoot, you'll have to go through me. For the first time. Charles looked shaken. Rosemary, he said, lowering his voice as if she were a frightened animal. Move aside. No. The words surprised them both. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere, a fence creaked. Seconds stretched until they felt heavy, slowly. Charles lowered the gun. What is he doing here, he asked. The question sharp with things left unsaid. Rosemary did not answer immediately. She waited until Chino stepped back, until the immediate danger had passed. Then she spoke not loudly, but clearly, each word chosen with care. He saved my life, she said. He helped me find the OSHA. He brought it back so my mother could breathe. Charles's jaw tightened. You should have sent for me. I didn't, she replied. And you need to ask yourself why. The words landed harder than accusation. Charles looked at her then, not as the sheriff, not as the protector, but as the man who had known her since childhood. You didn't tell me she was sick, he said. You didn't tell me you were going into the mountains alone? I've been telling you things for years, Rosemary said quietly. You just never heard the ones that mattered. Silence pressed in around them. Charles ran a hand through his hair, the edges of his composure beginning to fray. Do you have any idea what people will say, he asked. An Apache living in the woods near your land? I don't care what they say. That, more than anything, broke through him. You never saw it, he said, frustration spilling through at last. everything I did, I stayed close. I made sure you were safe. You stayed, Rosemary said. But you never stepped forward. The words were not cruel, they were simply true. Charles stared at the ground for a long moment. When he looked up again, his voice was quieter. I thought you knew. Rosemary shook her head. I waited for you to say it. I waited until waiting became the only thing I was doing. Chino remained silent through it all, his presence steady but unobtrusive. As if he understood this, reckoning did not belong to him. I didn't choose someone else to hurt you, Rosemary continued. I chose to stop waiting. Charles nodded once. The movement stiff. The gun hung useless at his side now, its authority drained. I see that, he said. He mounted his horse a moment later, his departure as controlled as his arrival. At the edge of the property, he paused, looking back once, not with anger, but with the quiet weight of a truth arrived too late. When he was gone, the world seemed to breathe again. Rosemary turned to Chino. You didn't have to stay. I wanted to, he said. She nodded. For the first time, the choice felt like it truly belonged to her. Chino did not come the next morning, at first. Rosemary told herself it meant nothing. He had always kept his distance, always moved according to rhythms that were not hers to command. Still, when she reached the fence line at dawn and found nothing there, no bundle, no sign of him, the absence settled heavily in her chest. Dorothy noticed before Rosemary said a word. You're listening for someone who isn't there, her mother said gently from the doorway, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. He didn't say he would come, Rosemary replied. Too quickly, Dorothy smiled, not unkindly. No, she said, but you hoped. The day passed slowly. Rosemary worked the small tasks she had neglected, mending a torn feed sack, scrubbing the kitchen table, checking the water barrels. Each chore grounded her, but none of them quieted the old fear creeping back in. The fear of silence, the fear that choice, once made, could still be taken away by absence. By the second day, the fear sharpened. She woke before dawn and walked to the gate, standing there longer than she meant to, staring into the trees. She remembered other mornings, other waits watching the road for Charles, telling herself not to expect too much. The realization stung. She had not escaped waiting simply by choosing differently. Waiting, she understood now, was only dangerous when it stole your voice. On the third morning, she found the horse. It stood just outside the gate, reins looped carefully over the post, calm and unmoving as if it had been there all along. No tracks led away from it, no sign of struggle, only the quiet certainty of its presence. Rosemary approached slowly, her heart pounding. She touched the worn leather of the saddle, recognizing the careful repairs, the way everything had been kept ready. This was not abandonment. It was something else. She untied the reins and led the horse inside the fence. Chino emerged from the trees not long after, moving with the same measured calm she had come to recognize. He stopped several paces away, waiting. I didn't want my staying to feel like pressure, he said. I need you to know the choice is yours. She studied him, seeing the restraint in his posture, the respect in his distance. No demands, no assumptions. You left the horse, she said. It is how I say I will stay. He replied simply, if you want me to. Rosemary felt the last knot inside her loosen. She stepped forward, closing the space herself this time. I don't want to be waited for, she said, and I won't ask you to wait either. Chino inclined his head. Then we walked forward together. The evening came in quietly, as if the land itself understood that nothing needed to be forced. Chino did not kneel. He did not perform a gesture meant to impress or claim. Instead, he reached into his satchel and removed a small object wrapped carefully in cloth. When he opened it, Rosemary saw a simple piece of worked silver, shaped by hand rather than polish, etched with a pattern that echoed the curve of the hills around them. "This was made by my father," he said. "It is not a promise of ownership. It is a vow to walk your road beside you." He held it out, not stepping closer, leaving the distance for her to cross if she chose. "In my life," he continued, "I have learned that love taken is never kept. Love chosen can endure, if you wish. I will build a life with you here, or anywhere the land allows us to stand as equals. If you do not, I will take nothing from you but the truth you have already given." Rosemary felt the weight of the moment settle, not heavy, but steady. She thought of the years she had lived quietly, shrinking herself to fit into other people's silences. She thought of Charles, of safety without risk, of affection that never asked her to step forward. And she thought of the mountains, of the cliff face, of the moment she had nearly let go, because no one had ever taught her that choosing herself was allowed. She stepped toward Chino and closed her fingers around the silver. "I choose you," she said, her voice clear, unhidden, not out of gratitude, not out of debt, but because with you, I am allowed to remain myself. Chino exhaled, slow and unguarded, as if he had been holding his breath far longer than she knew. He reached for her hand, then not to lead, but to stand with her. They did not speak again for a long moment. The wind moved through the grass, carrying with it the quiet truth the land had always known, that strength did not belong only to those who held the line, but to those who knew when to step beyond it. Rosemary's journey reminds us that love is not measured by how long we endure in silence, nor by how faithfully we remain in the places that once felt safe. For years, she mistook care for devotion and safety for belonging. In time, she learned, as many do, that affection without choice slowly begins to erase the self. Waiting may look noble from the outside, but when it requires a voice to vanish, it becomes another kind of surrender. Love was not proven by patience alone, nor by sacrifice made in silence. Love was the courage to speak, to choose, and to walk forward without leaving yourself behind.